Okay, we're going to start just by talking about some basic geometric vocabulary. That's what this whole first section's about. And we're going to talk about some really big things that we go with, like points, lines, and planes down here. These three are really important for things we do. And then we kind of break them into these other things that we have. So to start with a point, it's really hard when we're talking about a point to kind of define it. We might say that it's zero dimensional. It's got zero dimensions. And if you remember from geometry, you probably think about coordinate plane a lot. When you talk about points and plotting those points out with the X and the Y and the like -1, 2, or whatever you got there, that makes it a location. Points we kind of think of as locations. When we go to uh, illustrate them, you guys know we use a dot. And then we'll name it with a capital letter. I'm just going to use an A there. When we name it, we just say that this is A. We use one capital letter. We don't have to say point A, or we don't have to draw the dot and the A when we're naming it. We just say A, and we know that we're talking about a point. Now, when we move to lines, definition, again, this is another hard one to do here. I'm going to say that this is one dimensional. It takes this idea of straightness. They have to be straight. They can't curve. They can't bend. Excuse me. So there's none of this. They're straight and they are infinite. They go on forever. When we illustrate them, it's just a line, straight line. You guys know what that is. And then when we name it, we use a couple of points, only 2 points. It can be any 2 points. And I name it BC, and I write it like that. Or it's okay to write this as CB, and that's a line. Now, from these points and lines, what I can do is I can go through and do lots of other things. I can talk about rays. Rays have an endpoint, and then they go in one direction forever. So a lot like a line, except they just stop. One end has the arrow, one end has the endpoint, and this is ray DE. Now, a couple of things when we name this first one has to be the endpoint, and then we draw the arrow over the top of it. So make sure that this first point, this first letter in the name, is the end point of the ray. And then we can talk about line segments. Line segments are really just part of a line. Part of a line. So instead of the line going on forever and ever, it just gets endpoints. I name those, and I would say that this is segment FG or GF. Either one is fine. We can flip-flop those. The only one we can't flip-flop are rays. Now notice when I'm naming these, when it's a line, I put a little line with arrows on it. When it's a ray, I put a little ray above the letters. When it's a segment, I put the segment above the letters. That's important so that we know what we're talking about. We want to make sure that when other people are reading this, they're clear about what we're doing. Now, opposite rays, they're two rays with the same endpoint, and they go in opposite directions. They look, well, here's a ray. The other one, same endpoint, is going the opposite direction, and it does that. And what I get when I do the whole thing is a line, but I'm looking at it like two rays. Call that point H, J, and K. So my two rays, one of them is HJ. Make sure you start at the end point, go to the point, go through the other point, and HK. Now the whole thing is a line, and you could call that line JH, line HK, line JK, any of those. But when we're talking about opposite rays, like this, make sure the endpoints go first. And then finally, we have a plane. Now, when we're talking about a plane, this is two-dimensional. You would have heard this in math when you probably talk about the coordinate plane. And that coordinate plane is just this big flat area, and it's got a whole bunch of numbers on it. So when we think about planes, they're flat. They're this big flat area. Now, we in geometry aren't going to necessarily put a whole bunch of numbers on them. They're going to be just these big flat areas. And when we try to draw them, it gets a little tricky trying to draw this stuff. We usually draw that like this, four sides, usually slanted. If it's not, it won't be a huge deal, but normally that's how it gets written. And when we name the stuff, we name it. We can do it a couple of different ways. I like to name it like this with 3 points on it, plain QRS. But sometimes you'll see them named with this little letter out on the outside. Typically, that letter is in some sort of script writing, some sort of fancy looking P that's italicized or something like that. Um, I have a hard time drawing those, so I don't use that. That's why I like the three letters. But either one's okay, and you'll see both of them as they're written through there.